I don't think I ever would have had criticism if what I had done was like a baking cookbook. We closed the central kitchen and the teeny site that we opened. The story of closing them was that we were going out of business. Every kind of media outlet had some sort of piece on like why I was the worst person on earth. The whole narrative was a real criticism of healthy eating. Really did feel I was a kind of public enemy number one. I certainly didn't have the confidence to fight back. It was really brutal.
Telling someone that the way they're dealing with a chronic illness is wrong is deeply problematic. No one would have not taken a man's chronic illness seriously and would have told them that they were doing something wrong in response to it.
Strangely, it was this moment of like just extreme apathy. I just gave up.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Such a pleasure.
I'm so excited to get into your story. I think that you were, like, definitely I feel like in the UK and having participated in the fitness space from like early teens in terms of like 2010s rather than my teens. I think that like you've made such a mark and you were such like a first mover in the space. I just can't wait to get into your whole story and, you know, how it's been since then. What would be really helpful to kind of set the scene would be just to give a little bit of background on like the start of your life, going to uni, beginning of your career, just set the scene for us.
Okay. There's not much to say, and I do say that as a cop-out, but it's not kind of, I guess it's not that interesting. I had a kind of complicated in some ways childhood, straightforward in others, second of 4 siblings. But I never really, and I didn't know this at the time, I wish I had, because I think I would have been a lot happier, but I really didn't know who I was. Hadn't figured out anything that interested me or what I was good at. I felt kind of distinctly average. And I, in retrospect, did have actually very, very low self-esteem. I just couldn't figure myself out at all. And I'm sure that's something that lots of people will relate to. There was not one specific problem or it didn't manifest in one specific way. I just fundamentally wasn't particularly happy and I didn't particularly like myself. But I don't know if you would have known that from the outside. It was much more internal. And then I went to uni and I went up to Scotland. I wanted to get a kind of sense of distance to see if that would help me kind of, I guess, establish myself and get to know
or like
myself.
Find out who you are by meeting other people.
Exactly. And no one I knew was going there with me, and it was, you know, nicely far away from home but close enough. And I did. I actually loved it, and I had 2 amazing years there. And that second year, I just felt, wow, this is how life can feel. I was so kind of joyful and happy and so stuck in, and had made loads of friends and got this great boyfriend. And yeah, it felt like the pieces of who I was and how I felt kind of made sense. I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life.
What were you studying?
I was studying history of art. I'd wanted to go to art school. I'd always been a much more creative person, but my dad felt that wasn't kind of legitimate. Basically that's a theme that will continue, but so that was like my compromise, effectively. And I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it or kind of particularly want to pursue it, so I really didn't know what was next, but I was really enjoying my life at that point. And then it was the end of my second year of university that I got very unwell out of nowhere, and it kind of felt, I think it felt even more like a punch in the face, because for the first time in, 21 years, I felt happy. And then suddenly it was like that was stripped so quickly and so kind of brutally. And I went from feeling for the first time like I fitted in, and I'd never felt like I fitted in before. I felt like I was always trying to fit in, but I hadn't quite succeeded. And then I felt more alien, more of an outsider than I'd ever felt. I felt lower than I'd ever felt. And I think there was this even more frustration almost, because it was, you finally felt you were on the path you wanted, only to be kind of smacked a million miles outside of it.
And what were those, did like everything start happening at once, or was it like little symptoms here and there?
It was relatively quick, to be honest. It felt, you know, good and everything, and then suddenly, almost out of nowhere, my health just kind of felt like it fell off a cliff. And I, over the course of about 6 to 8 weeks, had gone from living a completely normal life to basically being bedbound. Yeah. And I had extreme chronic fatigue, kind of bordering, I guess, towards the ME inside, in the sense I really couldn't do anything. I couldn't control my heart rate or my circulation or my digestion, and so my heart rate would be normal sitting down, high 50s, and then I would stand up and it'd be about 180, 190.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so you've got consistent heart palpitations. You feel like your heart's going to just like ping out of your body at any point. Obviously that's really exhausting, but also your blood pressure drops when you stand up, so then you kind of get incredibly dizzy, you can get that blacking out. Obviously you can pass out, so you don't really feel like you can move around or do anything. And then I had extreme pain, just body pain everywhere. It felt like my body was like on fire. And all sorts of other things like migraines, extreme IBS. I looked more pregnant at that point than I did when I was almost 7 months pregnant with my daughter.
Wow.
So basically nothing worked. I had like extreme infections. I spent, I think it was almost 3 years on antibiotics for like extreme level of UTIs. The longest I was off it was 72 hours.
Oh my God.
So it was extreme. And I was, that whole summer I was in hospital I had several MRIs and colonoscopies and endoscopies and cystoscopies, which when they put a camera into your bladder, because I was starting to get scarring from these infections, swallowed cameras, had to not eat or drink anything for 12 to 24 hours, wake up to a little post-it note saying nil by mouth. And I was just so lost on kind of every level.
Imagine. And did they, when you say first went into hospital, did they have a kind of idea of what was going on?
Well, initially, actually, the assumption it was all to do with my stomach, because I looked so extreme, as in I looked like I was 7 months pregnant. I couldn't do up a single item in my wardrobe. Like I couldn't wear anything that I owned.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. And so the assumption was that obviously had to be something to do with my stomach. So initially I was working with a lot of gastroenterologists, and then it was hormonal that was causing that. So it was endocrinologists, then it was neurologists, and we kind of went round and round the houses until I eventually got my diagnosis. And then when I did get that, I was actually really happy, which like in retrospect, I kind of want to give myself a hug and be like, oh, it wasn't going to be that easy. But I think I had felt so confused, and almost sometimes people kind of asking the question, like, is this psychosomatic? Are you... And
then you feel like you're
exactly
a little bit like gaslit.
Totally. And it's like, because you can't explain, being in such extreme pain. For example, like it hurts me when you just touch my arm. That's quite hard. You can't see it.
Yeah.
And you can't see the extent of the dizziness, or it's that exhaustion, which is like I could sleep for the next 6 weeks and it wouldn't make any difference. I feel when I'm lying in my bed, like it would be so hard to just move my arm. Like that would be so exhausting. The idea then of like standing up and going to the kitchen feels as hard as it feels to me to like go and run a marathon today.
Right.
And I don't run. Like it feels that hard. Which I know you can't explain that to people.
No, of course. And I think especially if people can't find answers, I can imagine you started to doubt yourself as well. And I can imagine it's just like, you want to be like, I promise you, I'm feeling like this.
Exactly. But I can't, it's not really tangible. And then even when I did get the diagnosis, it's called postural tachycardia syndrome. It's not an illness that people are really familiar with either. And it's still largely invisible. And so it's quite easy to feel lost by it. And I think also because I was lost and I already had low self-esteem, and my natural inclination was to kind of, I guess, protect myself. My instinct was to draw back and to retreat and to not talk about it and just accept the fact that people wouldn't necessarily get it, and almost use that as evidence to retreat further from the world.
And when you were given that diagnosis, what did they say that kind of meant?
It wasn't particularly clear, to be honest, and I think I probably didn't ask all the questions. There's definitely kind of blurriness almost at that point, but it's a chronic illness. Some people respond really well to the drugs, some people don't. Slightly, we don't know what will happen next, but I just felt because it had a name and because there were lots of different medications that I could take, then it would obviously get better. And like 6 weeks from now, I'd be back at uni and I'd be back living my best life. And I can just take these drugs and like, that will be that. I don't really have to do anything. And then when that wasn't the case and I didn't really get any better, even though I was taking kind of 20 to 25 different drugs every day, that was the bit that I think was the kind of really... And it actually wasn't the wake up call. Strangely, it was this moment of like just extreme apathy.
Yeah.
I just gave up.
Yeah.
I just felt that there weren't any solutions at this point. And so I just kind of retreated from the world almost for the next like 6 months. I didn't try and talk to my friends. I didn't try and, for want of a better expression, bring anyone on the journey with me. I just kind of retreated. And I think it took me like 6 to 9 months to recognize that and to recognize the fact that like the current trajectory was awful. Like it was really depressing. And, you know, and I remember talking to my mum about it and I kind of was saying to her, but how would I move out of home?
Right.
Like how do I have a job? What could I possibly do? And I remember her and I trying to kind of go through potential options and nothing led anywhere, because I just wasn't well enough to do any of it. And I think that was the moment where I thought, okay, so I've got to find a way to change something, because I don't think I'd been honest with myself about quite what it meant. I just retreated. I watched all of the Kardashians or type shows. I was Grey's Anatomy, I think it was, and loads of reality TV type shows, and just retreated completely from the world. And that was the moment of realizing like everything that I thought that I could do. And as I said, I didn't have any ambitions. It's not like I had this clear career plan where I wanted to achieve X or I wanted to achieve Y, but I wasn't going to achieve anything.
Which probably made you feel even more lost, because it was kind of like, you know, if you already had this feeling of kind of loss and lack of direction, as you said at the beginning, and then you're in this situation where it's like, not only can I not do anything, but I don't know what I would want to do if I could do anything. And I can imagine that was just like a real low.
Completely. And maybe it would have helped if I did know what I wanted to do, because I think maybe it would have helped me try and channel some motivation. It's worth trying to get from A to B. But I think because I hadn't got a clue what B was, because I didn't really know myself and I didn't really know what I wanted from life. Yeah. I'd never really felt I was fine at everything. I wasn't kind of catastrophic. I wasn't a failure, but I wasn't particularly good at anything either. I'd kind of just been like fully average. I think it didn't probably help finding some kind of drive to try and push myself to look for other solutions or other ways out, because I don't think I had enough mission or purpose to want to get out.
No, I can completely understand that. And I can imagine that was just terrifying and boring and like all of the things in between, where you're kind of just like, where do I go from here?
Totally.
And so what happened from this point of diagnosis and the drugs not necessarily working in the way they originally thought they would? What happened next in terms of your university, in terms of your kind of day-to-day?
So I kind of just stayed at somewhere near my rock bottom for about 6 to 9 months. And then...
Didn't go back to university?
I did a bit, but I didn't leave my room.
Right.
Yes. Right. Which, I mean, who knows in retrospect what was the right decision and what wasn't. I think it made me feel infinitely lonelier, and I think I probably used that isolation that I had put on myself as evidence again to the fact that like I didn't fit in and you know, no one likes me.
And I also think that like university friendships can be the best friendships ever, but I also think they can be quite fickle in the first few years, because you're all trying to find your new self, your new direction, your adulthood, all of this. And so you kind of like, you know, I know lots of people who made really good friends in first year and they turned out to be people they never spoke to again kind of after that, because everything's so quick and it's so sociable in a way that you never get again in your life. And so I can imagine that I don't know what your friends were like at the time and whether they're still friends that you have now, but like I can imagine having made those friends, that's also based off not just liking each other, but being able to go out and being able to, you know, whatever it might be.
100%. I mean, I think that was a really big part of it. And I remember one moment where I used to just like sit and refresh Facebook, and I remember all these photos coming up, and it was a party that and it was like one of the big parties everyone would look forward to every year. And all of my flatmates and all of my friends were there together, and they were so dressed up and they looked so glam and they looked so gorgeous. And there I was, and like really not looking my best. I looked like I was 6-7 months pregnant. I felt kind of completely catatonic, which in retrospect was quite a hefty experience of depression, but I didn't realize that depression could mean apathy at that point. I thought I just needed to be crying, and I felt nothing. I didn't feel sad. I felt numb. But I remember that like really hit me like a ton of bricks actually. When I was there, I was wearing some like extra large men's tracksuit to fit around my stomach, and I was swallowing all these steroids. I was on God knows how many antibiotics and beta blockers and all the rest of it. And I still couldn't do anything. And all my friends were there, and they looked so gorgeous and so glam, and they were living their complete best lives. And I just felt like a freak. And I know that's such a kind of brutal, and that's very much, I feel like, a early 20s view of yourself, because I think, as you said, we're all often on that journey in that kind of late teens, 20s period of our life where we are trying to figure out who we are and where do we fit, and who that push and pull between kind of being honest with yourself about who you actually are. Are you more introverted, etc. And what the norms are at that point in life, which are kind of annoyingly quite set, but I was so far removed from being able to join in with that. And that, it was just one of those moments you remember.
And had you, random question, but interested in terms of like who you had around you at that point, had you maintained the relationship that you kind of got into in the previous year?
I had maintained the relationship, and he was one of the only people that I was honest with, but I didn't maintain really any of my friendships. I don't think I was comfortable being vulnerable.
And I think once especially if you're in a point of kind of apathy, but also kind of an element of exclusion and all of these things.
And victimhood, like, to be really frank with myself, I definitely saw myself as the victim, as this is really unfair. Why has this happened to me? I saw it as being deeply unfair. And so I think I put myself into people should be nice to me because this is really difficult for me.
Right, and chronic illness is deeply unfair, but I also, I completely
But it doesn't help.
Exactly, I completely take what you're saying in a way of kind of perhaps there would have been more people there for you. Like,
if I had opened my door, I know there are people in my life, and I said, look, I can't come out, and this is really difficult that I can't drink and I can't come to the party, but I can watch a film. Like on the night you're not coming out, should we have something to eat together and watch a movie and like cuddle up? I think that's just been a big lesson for me over the last kind of 12, 13 years, is like, ultimately life is full of unexpected challenges, and whether it's chronic illness, loss, whatever it is, challenges in your work life, your personal life, that is the nature of life. And I think accepting that is so important, because fundamentally, like, the only thing you can do is internalize the solution. And I think the more that difficult things will happen, and only you can find a way really fundamentally to get through it. That's probably the thing that I wish I knew most at that point, which is that this is unfair to some extent. This is really difficult, but other people have it infinitely worse. There are still really good things in your life. You're ignoring those good things. You're choosing not to see them because it kind of paints an easier story for you to tell yourself, to make up more excuses why you can't do anything that would help you.
And I think that's really powerful in being able to recognize and being able to kind of take control of, what happens next for you and who you have around you. And what did happen next in kind of you moving on from that point?
It was the moment that I recognised what was actually happening, and how isolated I was, how depressed I was, how like dire my physical health was, and the fact that on those grounds, like, I didn't really have much future. It was the moment that I recognised that, which, as I said, took me like 6 to 9 months to be able to do. And only I could do it. Other people could tell me, I think this would help or that would help. But fundamentally, I think when you make big changes in your life, they have to come from you. They can't come from anybody else, because big changes are hard. And I think it's only that really internal motivation that works. And yes, it was recognizing the bleakness of the future, not just the now. And therefore, surely there's more that I could be doing. And it was almost in kind of a big sense and a small sense. It's like I knew, if I ate loads of pick and mix, it made my heart palpitations infinitely worse. Like the worse my blood sugar got, the worse palpitations got. And they were already horrendous. Like a normal heart rate when standing for me would be 180 to 190. And so why don't I try and not make them worse? Why don't I take a level of responsibility? Or my doctor said, we're trialing an exercise program. Do you want to be part of that? And saying, yes, I do. I want to take these active decisions. And as I started doing that, I guess it got broader than that. And I started to be very interested in, okay, I think I'm this victim. And I am to an extent, but I'm not the only person who's dealing with chronic health, and I never will be. And I certainly haven't been in the past. What have other people done? And, I started reading stories of people all around the world who'd had all sorts of different challenges with their health. And they had used various different facets of the kind of health and well-being world, diet and lifestyle, nutrition, to improve or change or alleviate various symptoms. And there's a sense of, well, if it's worked for them, it might work for me. And almost just that was this kind of extraordinary game-changing moment in my life where I think I actually took some responsibility. And in taking responsibility, I felt so empowered. Nothing had changed. It wasn't better. Like, I certainly didn't know if I would be better, but I had this sense of hope, and the hope came from me and the idea that I could drive this forwards. And so I thought, okay, and the other thing that I realized I needed was something to occupy me. It was so unhealthy to just sit in my bed all day and refresh Facebook and look at what I wasn't doing and feel worse about myself, or just to kind of binge watch series. Nothing wrong with binge watching a series, but when you've done that every day for 250 days, not so good. And obviously the hobby's got to be realistic, given the fact that, I couldn't do the vast majority of things, but there were things I could do. And again, it was trying to remove the excuses. And so that I started trying to change my diet, and I thought, well, I will do this as my hobby. I will learn to cook, and I will write it all down, and I'm going to take photos of it, and I'm going to create a kind of diary of this, and let's see if it helped. And it was in creating that, so I started deliciouslyella.com, that I wrote down why I was doing this. And I wrote there, I'm trying to turn a negative into a positive. If that could help one other person, then maybe there's something worthwhile in this whole experience. And again, it was just so cathartic as my way of processing, I think, what had happened, and this idea that I could feel empowered, I could take control. Couldn't control everything, but there were many more things I could control than I was allowing myself to believe.
So what types of things were you doing when you started Deliciously Ella? Was it general kind of recipes? Was it posting updates on your illness?
It was all recipes. It wasn't really about me. That was, I wrote a kind of short, this is why I'm doing it, exactly as a bio, because it was weird. It was at that point, this was 2012, coming up to 11 years ago somehow. It was a strange thing to do. And I think the world we live in today, plant-based is so common. We're recording this in January, veganuary is everywhere. People are very aware of the link between nutrition and health and well-being, and the facets of kind of all the different angles of wellness that contribute to that. But that wasn't a conversation that people were having, 10, 11, 12 years ago. The world has changed at kind of lightning speed between now and then. And so I felt I had to almost justify why I was doing this, why I was trying to turn sweet potatoes into a brownie and so on, because it was quite out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and I think it was so, at the time, because it was so new, it was so the kind of, especially at a time when not everyone was on Instagram, there was this trope of like the people who are on Instagram who were eating like avocado chocolate mousse and like all of this stuff. And I can imagine there was like some real resistance to that, as much as there were people who were, loving it and very much benefiting from it. I can almost like see the Facebook memes.
Oh my gosh, so much resistance to it. And I think, you know, as well, definitely after Delicious Yellow kind of took off, for want of a better word, in the beginning of 2015 in the kind of media landscape, it was definitely a kind of big punch up. A public punch up, which when you're again in your kind of mid-20s, it was quite an experience.
I can imagine.
But yes, no, it was loved by some, hated by others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I feel like anything good you do, it needs to elicit some sort of emotion. Like if people are apathetic towards what you're doing, you're probably not making moves.
Although I went fully vanilla for quite a long time.
Really, to try and,
because it was Delicious Yellow sort of took off, for want of a better expression, beginning of 2015 with my first cookbook.
Mm-hmm.
That was the moment where we went from this big but niche online community into kind of public mainstream. The book had kind of broken a lot of records and had picked up a huge amount of media, and suddenly people were very interested in the space.
It was so of the time.
And there was nothing like it that had ever been done before. And I never used to own that, but it was nothing. It's
incredibly impressive.
None of the big kind of players in this space now had done anything in this space at that point. So it was quite revolutionary at that time. But I was 23.
Yeah. Right.
And I was coming out of a very dark place. And I hadn't known or admitted to myself how many of my mental health challenges I'd had, because I kind of couldn't face being so broken in every facet of my being, that I hadn't addressed that and I hadn't had any support in that area. And so I was dealing with a lot of kind of public narrative that moved from people talking to you to talking about you at such a young age, with no ability to handle it, with quite low self-esteem. And in beginning of 2017, there was a kind of 2 or 3 week period where I really did feel I was a kind of public enemy number one, and pretty much every, you know, like written bit of media, every kind of media outlet had some sort of column on piece on like why I was the worst person on earth. And
which is so wild.
I was just like Donald Trump, and it was really brutal.
I feel like with things like that, when it's like, sure, you don't agree with something, you don't want sweet potato brownies, you don't want like any of those things, it's like, you know, at the same time as if you're on a diet, you're not going to look at someone else and tell them they have to have a salad. Like, it's not, you know, it's really, there's a kind of element of mind your own business. But I also think we have such tall poppy syndrome in the UK, when it is kind of like and actually I think in social media in general, if you do really well at anything, and I would say that I've done well on social media, but I've never been in the kind of like public mainstream, which has meant that I've never kind of got into tabloid culture or general press hating me or whatever it might be. But like, there is this real element of like, you're built up and up and up and put on this pedestal just to the point that they can rip you down. Like, as in, there really is this element. And I would say especially with women, like, we don't seem to have a problem with men being successful for, like, what, you know, they might be saying, you know, if they're saying, oh, this is a ridiculous reason, she's got a cookbook, but she's not a, you know, whatever it might be. Like, we allow men to experience that success without having the need to rip it apart. And I really feel like we have this problem of like building people up to the point, it's the same as the girl boss thing. Like, it's like, build people up because you can't believe that someone's doing so well and looks so good and like all of these things, just to the point that you're like, I've put you on this pedestal, now I'm going to take you off this pedestal, like, so dramatically.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think at the time, you know, I was still very, very young, and I certainly didn't have the confidence and the courage to stand up for myself effectively, and kind of fight back. So that's not really my character, but to have an opinion on the flip side of it. Sure. But I think, you know, and that was one of the most like kind of startlingly obvious things, was that every person, and it was all about this, the whole narrative was a real criticism of healthy eating, and that the culture of healthy eating was inherently negative. And there were two things that I just didn't have the confidence to say. The first is that every person that was being criticized was a woman. And there was a lot of men operating in this space, you know, maybe talking about like before and afters and weight loss, and they were never mentioned in a single article. And I think you can't escape that. And now I would be very clear on that there's you can't escape the fact that that's a clear part of the narrative. And why is that? And I would have kind of pushed that and questioned that, but I did not have the confidence to do that. And I think the second part is I don't think I ever would have had criticism if what I had done was like a baking cookbook. And I think that that's a really important conversation because, you know, yes, I totally understand that there's facets of healthy eating and let's have a nuanced debate about that and about what we should be focusing on and what that looks like and what should public strategy be. But also let's be completely honest about the fact that our current state of public health is dire. The current trajectory of lifestyle-related diseases, the mental health epidemic, it cannot continue, and it correlates so exactly with the poor state of our diet and the way that we look after ourselves. And so, yes, you do not need to eat lentils every day. Yes, you do not need to be plant-based. Could I have been clearer about that? Probably. Was I 23? Absolutely. Did I know what I was doing? No. But you do need to eat lentils and carrots and potatoes. And I think we have to stop hiding from that. And again, at the time, I just didn't have the confidence to say, hang on a second. We need to talk about why we need to change the way that we eat. And the only way to change how we eat is by making healthy food feel more accessible, more exciting, more interesting, more delicious. That's what we're doing. And in retrospect, that was very interesting. But to your point about being vanilla, I took such a kind of beating from that. And it took such a kind of massive chunk of my self-worth, which again, I still hadn't really actively built back up or up in general at this point, that I felt I should just be really vanilla. I felt I shouldn't really have an opinion. I kind of, everything was so, but you can do it your way. To the point where it's like, what on earth do we as a brand stand for? And I think we really, 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 really lost our way in some way around that time because yes, not everyone's going to like you and that's absolutely fine. But I think A, I found that quite hard to admit. And then B, I think because the people not liking me had felt so vicious that I was just scared of kind of bringing that up again.
It's so interesting because I definitely went through the vanilla stage too in terms of being like, I was so apologetic. Like I remember I got this like torrent of bad press for like this one, I can't remember what it was. It was something that was like, so I was like, if you're gonna do that, do it about something that's like worth it. Like this is the least like, I can't even remember what it was, but I remember being so apologetic and being like, oh, I didn't mean to come across that way. I didn't mean this. If I had sat there and been like, no, I didn't come across that way. You're looking for things to like go wrong. And actually, if you don't want it, don't follow it. Like, as in, I'm irrelevant enough that if you don't follow me, you're never going to see me. So like, just move on. And I think also that would have ironically made me more likable. And it's like you start just like caveating everything, disclaiming everything, like all of this,
right? And then you mean nothing to no one.
And everyone's just like, okay. I also think that it is inherently and like vastly problematic that sure, someone doesn't want to eat lentils, someone doesn't want to eat avocados, like whatever. You were recovering from a chronic illness by doing something that empowered you and made you feel better and made you healthier. That doesn't mean that it needs to apply to any other person. I think the press absolutely, and I haven't, done a deep dive into the bad press you got and all of these different things, but like, I think the press absolutely should have got a hard time for ripping into someone who is actually getting through a chronic illness and being like, you shouldn't do this for this, this, and this. Likelihood is you're a healthy person who's not been through that situation. Who the fuck are you to tell someone that they need to like not do that and not like, don't do it then. Like eat whatever you want. Like, I'm sure you eat somewhat healthy, somewhat whatever. It doesn't matter. But actually telling someone that the way they're dealing with a chronic illness is wrong is deeply problematic. And I don't think if they understood the illness better or understood chronic illness or took women's health seriously, because I think a lot of the time there seem to be this kind of like hypochondria and this kind of, we say it all the time with like issues like PCOS and endometriosis that, doctors don't believe women, and vastly like the disproportionate gender balance in medicine makes that even worse. I think no one would have not taken a man's chronic illness seriously and would have told them that they were doing something wrong in response to it. Like, I think that is deeply, deeply problematic, and it makes me so sad that you wouldn't have had the confidence at the time, which I wouldn't have had if I was in that situation, but to be able to turn around and honestly be like, honestly, fuck you. Like, as in, I actually, like, who are you to tell me what I need to do to get through this? And actually, this is the first time I felt great in like X amount of time. I don't care if you don't want to eat this. Like, that is not my problem. Like, literally none of this affects me. Sorry if I'm going on an absolute rant, but I really think it has to be said.
No, but I think we apply that to so much. And I think the challenge was, the argument was, don't tell everyone, don't publish recipes encouraging people to eat healthy food.
Sure.
LOL. Like, I mean, I don't really actually even know how to finish that sentence.
Yeah.
But it is exactly that. I think that we're just so quick to judge other people, and to, we all have our ways of doing things in our life, and outside the world of well-being, very much so. And we're just so quick to judge people's relationships, or the dress sense, or their career choices, or whatever it is, their parenting. We're just very, very quick to say, I wouldn't do it that way, so that's the wrong way to do it, so I fundamentally disagree with you and I'm going to write about it. And I think I guess the older I get, and also having 2 little girls, I think I feel very passionately about that. We should just all let each other be.
Yeah.
Let's be interested and inspired by each other. There's a huge amount to learn from one another, but also what works for you will not work for me. What works for you today, what probably won't work for you in 5 years.
Yeah.
In the way you work, the way you eat, clothes you wear, whatever it is, like every facet of your life. And I just think there's a kind of rigidness and dogmaticness which we treat a lot of conversations, and I think our health and well-being is a big part of that. And that is difficult. I remember writing in the first book, like, this is what worked for me, take the bits that work for you and kind of do with it as you will. But that's obviously what, that's not very interesting, is it? So let's just ignore that part and go for the bits that create a kind of riled up conversation.
I think it's so interesting, and I think that I wouldn't have had the equipment at the time to really analyse, like, this is why this is problematic. It's so easy to see a narrative on social media or in the press and to believe it. And I think that we, especially with social media, it's so easy to lack critical thinking when it comes to, like, I have it all the time when I, like, hear about a woman that's really hard to work with, and I'm like, oh yeah, but they're really hard to work with. It's like, or maybe that's, like, probably a function of the fact that we see women as hard to work with, and we see men as assertive, especially if they're successful and knows what works, whatever it might be. So I can imagine that was incredibly hard to deal with. And as someone who was experiencing a lot of success, I'm sure you also felt like, well, I can't really complain because I'm making lots of money and making lots of sales and all of these things, and therefore, like, who am I to say, sit down, just don't buy my book, you idiot.
Yes, no, exactly. I just didn't have the confidence to do that, and I think that's taken a long time to build. It's probably a kind of consistent life journey, isn't it? But I definitely at that point didn't.
And in terms of then building the business from the cookbooks to, the products you have in stores now, the restaurants, like all of this, how did that journey kind of start from the first cookbook?
So the first cookbook came out Jan 2015, and then it had this kind of roaring success, and it was very, very clear that there was this kind of enormous gap in the market. People were suddenly fascinated by kind of better for you food products and plant-based, but there wasn't anyone meeting that need. It didn't really exist in stores or obviously kind of on the high street. And I met my now husband at the end of Jan, so kind of a few weeks after the book had come out, and we met for work, and we kind of had a few coffee dates, but not romantically, like just conversation.
What did he do at the time?
He was working in finance.
Okay.
And then we started going out middle of March, and we moved in together after a week, and it was like,
oh my god,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
yeah.
Oh no, we moved in after a week.
How did
we
that
were engaged like 3
logistically?
months later, and had a dog, had started a business together. Within the year we were married.
Wait, are you like an impulsive person?
No. Well, yeah, actually, sorry, that was way too impulsive. No. I am in some ways. I think I'm kind of very considered in some senses, but I know what I want. And I think in that sense, I'm very clear on it, and he is as well. Yeah. And we both just had this kind of complete knowing. I didn't know if I ever wanted to even get married. I'm not sure I totally believed in the concept of marriage. This was like a full, 180.
Yeah. And so, sorry, I'm really interested in this. So you started being like officially together, and then a week later you moved in together.
Yeah,
How
so we went
even
on
logistically did that happen?
So we went on our first date on the Thursday, second date on the Sunday, third date the following Thursday, so a week later, and I never left. Didn't spend a night. We've literally not spent a night apart since, unless one of us has to travel for work.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Do you think you're like connected in some way? Like, to me, there's nothing, like, I don't trust myself enough to be able to judge someone well enough that, like, I know what I want, but I can't judge that they won't not be like that in a year, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, look, I didn't know I believed in marriage, if I believed in it at all, if I'd ever get married. I was quite skeptical. My parents had had a very strange relationship, and I was quite sort of skeptical of this whole area. The idea of like a soulmate, I mean, no way, like love at first sight, Disney only. So I was coming at this from the polar opposite end of the spectrum. But we met, and it's like, I don't really know how to explain it without sounding kind of completely mad, but it just, the other person was just home, and we'd led these very strangely parallel lives. We're almost 8 years apart. He likes me to say 7 so he can come down a year and get a year back, but almost 8 years apart. But our parents had worked together for a very long time. We lived about 15 minutes away from each other. Because our parents had worked together, we'd had some similar life experiences that had kind of really shaped us. And we knew so many of the same people. We used to go to so many of the same places because we were 8 years apart. And we met when I was really young. You know, I was 23 when we met. Yeah. So, you know, much before that would have been kind of mildly inappropriate.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he lived in the States from when he was 16 as well. You know, so when he left the country, I was 8. So we'd never met. He'd met my dad quite a few times. And knew him, but we'd never met. But when we met, it was just like, we just knew each other so well, even though we knew nothing about each other.
So lovely.
And it's, you know, I'm sure anyone around us was
they must have been like, what
very
the fuck?
Confused.
No, they must have genuinely been like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Especially the engagement, like 3 months later.
100%. And, you know, some people, I remember my ex-boyfriend saying like, is this a joke?
Like, are you okay?
Yeah, literally, like called one of my best friends and was like, is she okay?
Yeah.
Which is really valid and very caring.
Yeah.
And I would ask the same question.
I would also do that to someone who...
Yeah, like that's an extreme rebound.
Yeah. How long before was your previous relationship?
We broke up at the beginning of that January, and that had been just over 4 years.
Right.
So you can see why
I can understand why
be like,
I mean, it's great, like, as if you guys are clearly so meant to be together and all this, but if my friend had done that, I'd be like, let's sit down.
Yeah, exactly.
Cup of tea.
I need to talk to you. Yeah, more than fair enough.
Yeah.
So it was a kind of absolute whirlwind. It really was. And it has been since the day we met. You know, we've been together now 8 years, basically. And in that 8 years, you know, we've had 2 children and a dog. We've moved house 3 times. We've moved office 3 times. My parents have kind of broken up, and my whole like traditional biological family has dismantled beyond belief with all sorts of bizarre things. His mum had passed away. His family has therefore changed a lot as a result. We've, you know, started 4 different businesses together. It's like we've been living life on times 30, basically.
Yeah. Are you tired?
Yeah, please. Yeah, you know what? Actually, honestly, we're both really tired.
Yeah.
And I think we've really recognised that over the last, it's almost the last little bit has been quite normal, and then also navigating the business through COVID and lockdowns and Brexit and inflation. So it's like, not only, you know, and you know this better than anyone, owning a business is a experience, we should call it that. And you go like up, down, all around, and your highest highs and your lowest lows, and you never know what's coming. And, you know, you said earlier before we started recording, like the things that you think are going to be the best things you've ever done are the worst things you've ever done. And, you know, you're always living kind of on the edge of your seat, aren't you? Because you're always ready for whatever's coming next. But that coupled with next being like lockdowns and Brexit and inflation, etc. It's like it's almost impossible with 2 newborns, with a lot of grief and all the rest of it. So it has been, I think we normalised the madness of which we were living. And don't get me wrong, there has been some amazing moments in the madness. Like it has been incredible. Like it really has been incredible. It's been the adventure of a lifetime. We both feel deeply privileged to have had that experience. But we've certainly probably done like 30 years in 8.
Yes.
And I think we are both now feeling the consequences of it.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And so before we come on to that and what that means for you, let's talk about the businesses a little. I'd like to, so general trajectory of it was that you had the cookbooks originally and then that went into food.
Yeah, sorry, I went off on a tangent, didn't I? About
so
my relationship. But yes, so we had the cookbook, and then it was him and, well, I guess there's one part which is that he was looking at the way I was running the business and was like, I think you need a hand. And I say that not, that could easily be taken out of context as he was like being misogynistic and condescending. He wasn't. I was 23 and so I was really figuring everything out. And also, I think in business, knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at is essential, and being really open about that. And I am really good at brand, and I'm really good at knowing what to do in that arena. And I am really bad at all things practical and operations and logistics. And so he was looking, and I mean, everything was tiny at this point. It was just like cooking classes and supper clubs. But, my literal back of a, napkin sums about whether things were stacking up and I was charging the right ticket prices. And so he started to help me with those sorts of things because that's just not my area of expertise. I knew how to sell out the class and how to make, the next one 3 times bigger, because I knew how to get the brand right and the messaging right and the kind of USP right, but didn't know how to make the back end work. And, but then he hated his job in finance. He was just desperate to get out. He was like itching. And I think it just became very clear to both of us that he had the passion and the skill set for business, and I had the passion and the skill set for the brand. And if we brought that together, we could take this massive opportunity that Delicious Yellow suddenly had, where we had the brand that was leading the conversation in this brand new space, and people wanted to fill that up with food products on shelves, etc. And if we did it together, we could do that. And if we didn't do it together, we never would. And people are always quite quick to say it's like anti-feminist or it's self-deprecating to say we'd never have done what we've done without him. But not in a million years. Like Delicious Yellow probably would have stayed cookbooks and, recipe website and an app. And that's all great, but it never, ever, ever would have the kind of physical presence, the value that it has today as a company.
Did you ever have, because obviously there are so many horror stories, maybe I overthink everything. I can tell you for sure I overthink everything. But did you ever have like a moment of being like, with him coming into the business and obviously your relationship moving fast and like the business kind of moving fast and all of that, were you ever terrified that like something would go wrong or that you guys would break up and the business would go with it or whatever?
Strangely not, and I've worried about so many things within the business and where we're going and what we're doing. We both have 100 times. But whether or not we could do it together has been the only thing I've never, ever questioned.
Yeah. And
also, and everyone's so different that there's no one right way to do anything. But I think that sense of like completely never-ending support has actually been one of the things that's allowed us both to do what we do.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. And I've loved hearing about, oh my God, throwing things on the floor. I've loved hearing about your relationship in the business and like how sure you are. I mean, how sure you are makes me like so sure. I'm like, it must be the case. I want to come on to talking about the restaurants you opened. When was the first one?
Yeah, so that's the very first thing we did. So end of 2015, it was our kind of test basically, which was that he had quit his job. We had put literally all eggs in one basket, and we felt we needed to test the water. Like, is it really viable to take this online community and try and create goods and services that they'll want to be part of? And so we took a tiny lease. I think the rent was like 25 grand a year or so. We used to say it was like Marylebone. It wasn't Marylebone. Marylebone. It wasn't Marylebone. It was like Edgware Road. It wasn't as nice as it sounded, but it was this tiny, tiny, tiny site. And our sense was that, you know, the business was doing well via the cookbooks and the app and things. And so if that didn't work out, we could pay that rent until we could get rid of the lease.
Right.
You know, initially we thought, should we raise money? Should we open somewhere massive? And it was like, no, let's test and learn. And so we opened this tiny place, and we opened it at the beginning of December. Neither of us had any experience in hospitality at all. And we found this amazing manager, but she couldn't start till the end of January. And we thought, well, that's fine. Look, no one's going to come in December because no one's really interested in healthy living in December. So it just gives us a few weeks pre-January, pre-telling anyone it's open, to learn, to get it running. And we opened the doors, and within like 4 days we had these kind of 50-60 yard queues out the door. And what was meant to be our like beautiful curated brand experience was this like sweaty, unmanaged scrum, like sweet potatoes, and it was like
everyone diving for the lentils.
Literally, give me your carrots. It was a really kind of mad experience, and we were just there kind of 18 hours a day,
and
every single day. Yeah, and we had a system. So I did the tills at the entrance, and so I could get a sense of kind of our customer and like your first experience, and then Matt did the clean the table so that he could get the experience at the end and understand any kind of feedback that you had. And it was amazing. I mean, we were literally there 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we had, you know, we were really like learning as we went. But it was chaos, but it was very, very fun. Anyway, it was very clear to us kind of on day 4 that we needed a better site. This was wasn't a great location, but it was also a terrible experience because no one fit. And so people
were feeding back. Were people feeding back?
No, people loved it, but they'd come and they'd want to come in, and we only had 16 seats. So we're like, cool, you can have a table in 4 hours. I mean, it was a cafe. So
yeah, sure.
It's not worth waiting 4 hours for. Yeah. So it couldn't do what we wanted it to do. And so we found another site, a much bigger site, about 10 minutes walk away, which is the site that we still have. And we opened that. And that opened October 2016. And we started servicing them from a central kitchen, which was in South London. And we had like a little kind of shop window basically in the central kitchen. And the plan was to then roll those out and have kind of 7 to 10 of them to make the central kitchen work. They were all profitable at site level, but to make the central kitchen work, we needed to get more scale. We needed 6 to 7 of them. And at the same time, we launched our food products, and the food products launched August 2016, and they went straight into Starbucks, Waitrose, Holland & Barrett, Whole Foods, and like some more kind of smaller accounts, and Ocado. And they really, really took off, and that pipeline of different products to come really kind of was filling up fast, and we had overstretched ourselves. And that was incredibly clear on a kind of practical basis in terms of our time, but also we didn't have the financial resources to make the cash flow work.
Cash flow at that level. Also for people who don't know, with supplying supermarkets, like you essentially have to foot the cost for a significant amount of time. Yeah,
so we're buying the products, and then the supermarket are paying us a month later, roughly. And so, you know, that's very cash intensive at the beginning. And obviously as a new business, you don't have all the kind of invoice financing and things like that available to you at this point. And anyway, and so we had that and the sites, and trying, you know, we were given advice at the beginning, like, don't do too many things, you won't be able to do them well. And we were like, no, we can do it.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it. And Matt was very clear on that much earlier than I wanted to hear it. Like, we have to choose one or the other. We can't think that we can do a scale out FMCG company and a scale out hospitality company right now. We don't have any external money in the business. So we're literally living on like £2.
Yeah.
And we weren't taking a salary at this point, so it was very stressful. And we had to make a decision which one to do, and it was very clear that the scalable opportunity was in retail. And so we closed the central kitchen and the teeny site that we opened. And then what happened was the story of closing them was not the story. The story of closing them was that we were going out of business. And they were so loss making, and what a disaster. And that wasn't, and I say this completely honestly, that wasn't the story.
Yeah.
They were very profitable at site level. We'd opened the central kitchen knowing we needed at least more than 5 for that to work. But it was a pretty obvious choice because we had a really exciting FMCG company with all our food products and snacks going into supermarkets. And then we had a hospitality business that was much more cumbersome, that was much more challenging, and also realistically it's very, very expensive to open a restaurant or a cafe site versus getting a product going, because we were relying on organic marketing through social media and the community that we'd created. And so realistically we would have had to raise money to open that many sites,
right?
And so we chose the products business and we kept our one really nice site, and we closed the central kitchen and the teeny site that we were always going to close in the long run because it was a terrible site. And the story was that we were going bust. And every newspaper article that talked about it was like, what a terrible business it was, what a moron I was, how much we'd got wrong. No one mentioned the fact that like we were one of the fastest growing snacking companies at this point. We'd had 3,000 listings in a year. The business in that sense was going from strength to strength. And I got a call from one of the big 4 retailers asking if we'd be able to supply them because we were going bust. He was so sorry to read about it in the newspaper. Like, it had a really devastating impact on the practical running of the business.
It's just terrible journalism, because it's like,
it's easy, isn't it? You look on Companies House and you see some numbers and you deduce it down. But I think the frustration was just, here's this blogger who's a privileged moron. Clearly they can't get anything right.
We knew this was going to happen.
Exactly. And interestingly, one of my best friends said, some of her friends took real satisfaction in it. They were like, oh, have you heard Ella's failing? She's going out of business. And huge amount of learning from it. But it was, and look, I dragged my feet with the decision because I was like, it will be so bad for the brand. We've got to do both. And that's one of the things that I'm worst at in our business, is always thinking about kind of the brand and how it looks for the brand, not necessarily the kind of sensible business decisions.
Right. And I can imagine having to make that decision in terms of being like, look, I know we need to close, but
and we had to lose 25 jobs.
Right, of course.
Which is a horrendous thing to have to do.
Yeah, and I can imagine just like, I know that in that situation, I'd be so stuck on the idea of like, that's going to be so harmful, etc., that I would drag my feet as well. But just because I'd be like, yeah, sure, I know I have to do this, but like, give me a second. Because also like, the media shitstorm, all of like, just everything that's going to happen as a response. And I can imagine that probably just wasn't very nice to be like, let's do this now.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, you just wanted to put it off, didn't you? And I was like, I think you're just always secretly hoping there'll be some like magic answer that solves everything, and there never is in life.
And how did you deal with that, I guess, response? But also on top of the response, I guess there was an element of starting something that then didn't work out the way you thought it was going to work out. How did you like recover from that, I guess, mentally?
I think that it didn't feel to us like we'd started something that didn't work out. By the way, that's not to say that we haven't done that. Like, we made every mistake in the book.
Knew why it didn't.
That didn't feel like that, because I think we felt very confident if we had wanted it to, it would have. We had amazing customer base. Like, as I said, the sites did really well. The problem was trying to do too many things, and that's something that we definitely have a consistent problem in our life. But I think it probably, I said earlier about being quite vanilla and retreating quite a lot. I think this was a very similar time, and I think that all fed into that, let's kind of disappear. And, again, to be just completely frank, we're a business that operates in a very unusual marketing strategy, which is we don't have any external investment. We still have a marketing budget of about £3, relatively speaking, and yet we're trying to compete against like brands owned by Mondelez and Procter and Gamble and things like that. And so our marketing works. All our marketing is basically done organically through social media. We've just done our first paid ads for the very, very first time. We're like still spending a teeny bit of the fraction of what anyone else would spend on it. And so it was a terrible decision, and I take complete responsibility for that, because ultimately it didn't help our growth, because we weren't bringing new people into the brand, because we weren't doing anything interesting.
Yeah, it's so frustrating as well, because I always look back at that time and I'm like, we didn't use paid ads for a reason, but paid ads were so cheap compared to now. And it literally is like so infuriating, because you know, in the 2010s, you could literally build a business by buying customers through paid ads, and it always checked out. Like ROI wise, it always checked out. Whereas now it's like, you know, you can still get great results, but you can't inflate a brand artificially in the same way.
Yeah, completely.
Which is really tough to look back on. And what would you say your biggest learning throughout the whole, like if you could go back and speak to the you that had just started Deliciously Ella, what would you tell her?
I think such a good question. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I think the first is that nothing is ever either as good or as bad as you ever think it will be. You know, very few things are, you know, I think we've had moments where remember our first Starbucks listing, we were like, that's it, we're done.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's going to make us this many millions, easy peasy. No.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, it's a great listing, but I think it's so often you think one thing's going to happen, it's going to solve all your problems, and it's going to be the kind of silver bullet that will ride you to success, or something bad happens and you think that's it, everything's going to go crumbling down, and you know, there's certainly been a few moments like that, and it doesn't have to be that way. I think you can always find a solution if you're willing to admit the problem quite quickly and be very nimble with it. But I think that's probably my biggest learning, is like you kind of get through everything, personally and professionally. Like the hardest moments that we've had, you still find a way out the other side, and maybe the other side looks very different than what you'd imagined it to, but you can always do that. And I think there's been a huge amount of learning and a huge amount of growth and a huge number of phenomenal experiences and opportunities, but we've also had some really, really, really low moments. And I think knowing you can get through them, and nothing will ever be quite as dire or quite as brilliant as you think, to try and stay on a more even keel. Yeah. I think that's probably the weird thing that I work on the most now, is almost like not reacting to things. And then also just enjoying it. You know, I think that we live in such a culture of thinking like, when I achieve this, or when we've done this, or once this project's finished, I'm going to really enjoy my life, and I'll,
live for an end goal.
Exactly. And I think that the end goal always moves, you know, or a new problem arises. And I think there's this period of it which I didn't enjoy, because I think I was so deeply embedded in the stress and the nervousness and the anxiety and the ups and downs of it, that I think I stopped enjoying the journey, and I kept looking at like what the kind of light at the end of the tunnel was. And as soon as you got to that light, the next thing would happen. You know, I remember we raised investment to help us with our cash flow, and it was like, oh my God, we could breathe. And then 2 weeks later, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and you were just like, bloody hell, you know, this will. And that's obviously, that's an extreme example, but I think it was just, those are the life lessons, which is that you don't know what is coming, and you don't know how you'll navigate it. But what you do know is no one can guarantee that once you've solved one thing, life will be easy.
Yeah, and it's just, you create a roller coaster ride for yourself when you allow yourself too much up those highs and too down those lows. There's Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is all about entrepreneurship, and one of the best books I've ever read. He basically talks about entrepreneurship as, you're either in a state of euphoria or terror, like you're never in between. 100%. And it's like the most spot on thing I've ever heard.
And it destroys you. You know, your nervous system can't live like that.
No, it really can't. And I think that a physiologist who came on here, who was essentially being like, your body cannot tell the difference between you being given stress that, for me, it might be an order moved out by 4 weeks and that fucks our cash flow, and we're like, you know, I'm running around. Your body can't tell between that and you literally being told you're dying. Like, as in those differences, your body can't differentiate. It's cortisol. It's like, it's a stress level. And therefore you create this kind of unlivable environment for yourself, because you're constantly living off like huge dopamine hits and huge cortisol hits, where you're like, so you're always just in this like elevated, wired setting. And I'm really working on that, as well as being like, it's really bad, it's really good.
Either way, we'll figure it out.
Either way, you're going to be good.
Exactly.
And I think, I think that's a perfect place to end. I think that's a very valuable lesson, and one that I very much need to be learning.
Oh, me too. Work in progress.
Well, thank you so much
Such
for coming
a pleasure.
on.